Hello everyone, welcome to my first Q&A of 2024. I have a heap of questions here, so let's get straight to it. I've avoided leca because I hear a lot about adjusting pH, etc. Is it all necessary, or can I just use water or nutrient solution? You are not alone in this. A lot of people get intimidated by everything that we hear about growing your plants in leca, semi-hydroponics, pH, EC, and all those really technical things. And I was definitely one of those people until I decided to just dip my toe into it. Now, this answer is probably not going to be one that you're going to be very happy with because it's going to be laced with a lot of caveats, because there are lots of different things that determine how you actually make up your nutrient solution and how your plants survive. So, do you have to adjust the pH all the time? Simple answer is no, you don't have to, but you may. Let me explain further. I live in Melbourne, Australia. Our water here is absolutely fantastic. pH is great. Total dissolved solids are minimum. It's beautiful. This is the nutrient solution that I use. It's called Growth Technology Foliage Focus. It's a single bottle nutrient solution. When I get the water from my tap and I put this Growth Technology Foliage Focus in there, I test the pH, it's within the optimal range. And this is exactly what's been happening from the time I started growing my plants in leca. So when I'm just using Growth Technology Foliage Focus in my solution, I know I don't need to check the pH because it is always the same, always exactly where I need it to be. But if I put other things like silica in my solution, then of course that's going to change the pH. And at that point, I do need to check the pH and adjust it to get it to a level where it's not going to cause the plant to not be able to absorb the nutrients that it's going to be getting from that Growth Technology Foliage Focus. So it is entirely dependent. And then again, you don't really have to add all these things. You might not necessarily have to add silica. You might not need to add all these other things that are amendments, additions to your nutrient solution to enhance the growth of your plant. You can very well get by with just using a Growth Technology Foliage Focus or any other nutrient solution like you're using, like Dynagrow Foliage Pro, which is now I think Super Thrive Foliage Pro, and any others. You don't have to use this one. But of course, whatever it is you're using, check. I recommend you check the pH at least a few times just to know that you're within the right parameters and everything is going okay. And then after that, you probably don't need to, I check again when I move to a different house, for example, because I know that that water is different. So I say no, you don't have to check consistently and you don't have to bother with all this pH stuff, but there are limits and there are particular situations in which you might want to. And I know a lot of people who actually grow their plants without ever checking the pH. So it just depends on how much of a risk taker you are, what you're willing to do, what you're willing to not do, and just sort of make stuff up as you go along as well. There's a lot to be said for your own experience and how you find you grow your plants. So I highly encourage you to check the pH, see how you get on, and then maybe drop it. It's up to you. I don't know. But I definitely don't check my pH all the time. And while we're on the subject of pH, people talk about the pH of the nutrient solution within the reservoir changing. When you've put your nutrient solution in your reservoir after a few days, that pH is going to change. And I'm of the opinion that, well, yes, of course it's going to change because you've got the plant taking up the nutrients from that solution. You've got evaporation going on. Things are changing. It's a living thing. So yeah, it is going to change. Do you then go in there with your pH up or down to try and adjust the pH within that reservoir? That's where I draw the line. That's where I think that doesn't make sense at all. And I think your plants are robust enough to be able to withstand those minimal pH changes within the reservoir. I don't know. I have not done any specific scientific tests to prove this. All I can say is what I have done in my own practice, and I certainly don't go checking the pH of the nutrient solution within my reservoir because I know I'm not going to do anything about it because that is just way too much. Question number 2, how much water should be in the pot, or how much water should be in the cash pot actually touching the roots? Again, this is a question that is very much dependent. So I'll take it in these 2 ways. So you've got a plant that you've just moved from soil to leca. It's a new plant. It hasn't been living in leca before. So for these plants, these are the plants where I say you want to fill your reservoir and not have that nutrient touching the roots of that plant, because those roots are actually not used to living in that hydro environment, and if they're exposed to that nutrient solution which is stagnant, then they are likely to get mushy, get root rot, and your plant might die. It might have issues. But as your plant continues to grow, as those roots continue to grow, they will actually start to grow into that nutrient solution. They'll start to grow into the cash pot. Now, the difference between those roots and the roots that were there before is that the roots that you have now are used to growing in that hydro environment. So they will actually quite be fine as they're growing in that solution. Almost all my plants, once they're past the stage of getting used to growing in leca, those roots are actually living in that reservoir. Most of my plants are living in a submerged setup. So that pot is sitting right at the base of that cash pot and it's continuous access to that nutrient solution. And so are those roots, and those plants are absolutely fine. Those roots are fine. They don't have a problem. So you do have to sort of figure out at what stage your plant is at, and are the roots that are going to go into the reservoir used to living in that hydro environment. And if they are, in most cases, this doesn't potentially become a problem. Unless you're growing plants like alocasias, sometimes that can be a bit problematic, but that's a discussion for another day. What's the best plant food or fertilizer to give your plants that are in leca? This question I don't like so much because I don't like to use the word best, because there is no best. It just depends on what you've got available to you and what works for your plants. Honestly, I could sit here and tell you that this is the nutrient solution that you've got to try, but it's rubbish because it's just based on my completely anecdotal opinion. It's not like I did a scientific study where I got all the nutrients in the world, tested them on all my plants, and then came up to a conclusive conclusion that yes, this is the best nutrient solution to use. I got my results peer-reviewed and published in a scientific journal. No, I did not do that. And I doubt that anybody has actually. So everything that most of us are saying is literally just based on our own experience. I like to use Growth Technology Foliage Focus. Why? I'll tell you how I started to use Growth Technology Foliage Focus. I was growing my plants in soil. I heard a lot of people say lots of very good things about Foliage Focus. So I went and bought myself some Foliage Focus and started to use it. And it was absolutely fantastic. And then I decided to stop growing my plants in soil. I was exploring growing my plants in semi-hydroponics leca. And I found that I could actually use the same nutrient solution that I've already got in my home. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's cool. I don't like to buy new things when I've already got stuff I can use. So that's how I started to use Growth Technology Foliage Focus. And a few years later, here we are. It's still my nutrient of choice. Can you use Dynagrow Foliage Pro? Of course you can. Can you use the General Hydroponics range? Of course you can. It just depends on what you've got available and what works. The only thing I will say is if you're growing your plants in leca, you are certainly better off using a nutrient solution or a fertilizer that's been formulated, that's been specifically made for plants that are growing in semi-hydroponics. I do not recommend going to get an organic fertilizer like a sea salt, for example, something that is made out of fish emulsion or something like that. Not like there's anything wrong with those things. They're absolutely fine when you're growing your plants in soil. When you're growing your plants in leca, you need something that the plants can actually access. This has been specially formulated and is readily available for the roots to take up. The nutrients in fertilizers that are made for plants that are growing in semi-hydroponics are readily available. That's the difference. When you get an organic fertilizer, it needs to be broken down. So when you're growing your plants in soil, you've got microorganisms in the soil, you've got bacteria, it's a whole microsystem, it's a whole microbiome. And that actually breaks down that organic nutrient into a form that the plant can actually absorb. So when you're growing in leca, we don't have that microbiome. You've completely missed that step. So if you give your plant organic nutrient solution, your plant will probably start to tank after a while. So it probably won't be immediate because it's already got some reserves. But once all those are spent, it's going to start going downhill. And then you'll start to say that leca caused your plant to die. No, it's not leca. It's because your plant actually doesn't have access to the nutrients that you're providing because it's in a form that it can't get. So I think that is all I will say about nutrients, and I wish you all the best finding a nutrient that works for your plants in leca. Next question. When you're using the long method to move plants into leca, how long do you usually let the plant grow in water or CCS? This question really for me is like, how long is a piece of string? So generally I want to have the roots that are coming from that long method to be at least 2 inches long and with secondary roots. Beyond that is a bonus. And have I kept plants in the long method for 5 months or more? Yes, I have. Why? Because I just didn't have the time to fix it. I'll show you a plant. This is my Philodendron stenolobum. Look, it is just a crazy plant, isn't it? It is absolutely insane. This plant has been sitting in this solution. Well, not specifically this solution because I change it over every few weeks. It's been sitting in this bottle for probably more than 4 months, probably 5 months even. I don't know. And why has it been sitting there for so long? And you can see that it's actually been sitting there for so long because those roots have literally taken up the shape of that bottle because they're still root bound in there. Look at that. Look at that. It is insane, absolutely insane. And they're quite hard. And yeah, so these are the old roots that, you know, would be coming off in that solution. And I absolutely expect that to happen. But a lot of the new roots, you can see the new roots there. This is a new root. This root wasn't there before. So yeah, you can keep your plants in the long method for quite a long time. And it works well. It really does. So when I put this plant in leca, I expect it's not even going to skip a beat because those roots are so used to living in that nutrient solution. It doesn't even remember at this point what it was like living in soil. So the answer is you can keep it in the long method for quite a long time. And one of the things I see people doing a lot when they're growing their plants using the long method is actually not keeping it in the long method long enough. To be honest with you, I have people say, I put my plant in the long method, it didn't quite work. And when I tell them, look, I've had my plant in the long method for like 3 months, they're like, what? Yeah, so if you can keep your plants in there for really long, a longer time, much longer than most people think. Look at that. Look at that. Those roots are just absolutely insane. So yeah, if you can keep it in there longer, even better. So, I mean, I definitely, depending on the plant and depending on the growing season, where you are, temperature, all those kinds of factors, I generally don't keep my plant in the long method for less than a month and a half at a minimum, because it needs that long in most cases to just get those roots going, get over that initial shock and just be really happy. And of course, in that time, remembering to actually take that nutrient solution out and put in fresh one. And at that point, you're actually not taking the plant out and examining the roots. You're not doing that. Just leave the plant alone and it will do what it needs to do. Okay, next question. I only have water propagated cuttings that I have tried to transfer into leca, but some of them don't do well and or have gotten root rot. What's the problem? That is an interesting question. So you've got cuttings that you water propagated. I would love to know about the roots of those cuttings and how things went with that propagation. It's really quite difficult to answer a question like this because I also don't know what conditions that you had your plants in. So when you're moving your plant from soil to leca, from water to leca, when you're changing the situation of a plant, it's a very delicate period. You want to support that plant as much as possible. You want to give it the best conditions that it can have. So we're talking nutrition. So for me, I generally don't water propagate just water only. I like to use a rooting solution in my propagation. So I use my GT Clonix clone solution, and that actually feeds the plant as it's growing. I use my root zone to stimulate those roots and just get things growing the way they need to be. I also love to use a heat mat because that's getting the roots and the plant to a temperature where it's actually growing and is happy to be in. So just getting everything just so. Let's not forget light. Light is also a very, very crucial aspect in this. So all those things, humidity, depending on the plant. So you want to examine all those things, examine how things are going there, and probably throw in some hydrogen peroxide to treat that root rot if it's there, and making sure you're changing over that solution. So whether you're using a rooting solution or whether you're using water, you want to change that over at least once a week if you can, once every 2 weeks if things are at a complete pinch, but you want to change that solution over because you want to replenish the oxygen. You also want to give that plant new nutrients, but then also you've actually got bacteria and things that are starting to grow in that water or in that nutrient solution. So the longer you keep it there, the longer they thrive and the more your plant is exposed to that. So changing all this stuff over will help get your plant across the line. I hope that helps. Okay, when I use leca, the top dries out quickly. Is this the problem? Should I be trying to keep it moist by adding more water? It's so interesting how this question comes up time and time again. I don't know who came up with this and, confused everyone. But yes, the leca at the top is actually going to be dry. It's going to look dry because that leca is actually exposed to the atmosphere. Evaporation is going on. That leca at the very, very top is invariably going to be a lot drier than the leca at the bottom. Leca works by capillary action, right? So whether you're growing your plant in the submerged setup where you've got your plant sitting inside the cache pot in direct contact with the nutrient solution, or you're growing your plant in a wick setup where you've got the nutrient solution at the bottom and you've got a wick going into the nutrient solution, that water in the cache pot is going up, right? And at the bottom, it's wetter than at the top. It's a gradient. So wetter at the bottom, drier at the top, wetter in the middle. So I would not go misting the leca at the top or putting more water in there. All you're going to do is probably going to get way too much water in your reservoir and you're going to drown out your roots and they're going to get root rot. So don't worry about that. As long as you've got water in your reservoir that is going to the leca at the bottom or the wick, that is all you need. Leca, the reason we love leca so much is because of that capillary action. Basically, it's like this, right? So you've got the moisture at the bottom. You've got a little leca ball that's exposed to that. It's going to shrink up that water. Then the little leca ball that's next to it is going to get it from that neighbor and from next ball, and the whole thing becomes moist because that leca is just soaking all that nutrient solution or water up. So do not worry about that. Do not stress at all. The leca at the top is going to be a bit drier. It's going to look dry. Don't worry about it. Next question. Please share the full name of the root zone that you use and maybe show the jar. I've tried multiple times to try and find it and nothing. I never seem to find the right product. Thanks. I got you. This is the root zone that I use. It's made by a company called Growth Technology in Australia, and this is it. It might have a different looking label, I'm not sure, because they've recently done a rebrand, but it will definitely be in a black bottle. The bottle might be a bit bigger because it's 1 liter, or it might be small like this one, which is 250 mils, and it's got this little shake well thing at the top because you need to shake it, and it's got the instructions on how to use it at the back. This is what you need, and you've got this label at the back as well. That is the GT Growth Technology logo. That's what you will see on your bottle of the root zone that I use. You can find root zone if you're living in the US from a website called Plant Hall. You can use my discount code, which is on the screen here, and you'll find the link to all that in the description below. If you're in Australia, you can find it at any good plant store, or you can get it from the That Foliage Life website. You can also find the discount code up here and the links in the description below. But yeah, That, my good friends, is Root Zone. And I use Root Zone all the time. I mix my Root Zone with my Foliage Focus for my plants as maintenance. Like all my plants usually just have a Foliage Focus mixed with Root Zone. But when I'm doing soil to leca transitions, or I'm doing the long method, or I'm propagating, I mix my Root Zone with my Clonix clone solution, or I'm not sure what they call it. I think it's called cutting clone solution in the US. I mix it together, and that's what I love to call my special sauce, and that's what I use. And this thing will make your roots explode. And as GT Marie loves to say, party at the bottom, party up top. Your roots will go insane. Your leaves will be happy. Next question. Do I transfer my 1 meter tall fiddle leaf fig from soil to leca using the long method or straight into semi-hydro? Oh, I love this question. I love it so much. And I will give you a little sneak peek. If you have been following my posts on Instagram and some of my shorts here on YouTube, you will have seen that I've got a massive giant fiddle leaf fig that I'm transitioning from soil to leca at the moment. It's actually ongoing, and I'm using the long method to transition this plant. It's huge. The leaves of this plant are larger than my head. I kid you not. This is the fiddle leaf fig plant that I'm transitioning from soil into leca. As you can see, the plant is still very healthy. Those leaves are looking fabulous. I'll take you down there and show you what those roots are doing. My fiddle leaf fig plant is living inside a bucket. That's the bucket that my husband uses to wash the car. Don't tell him he hasn't noticed. I decided to take on this plant and transition it from soil to leca because it's a great challenge for me. I wanted to see if I could take one of the most difficult plants to transition from soil to leca, according to most people, and transition it. And of course, it's always harder to transition a plant that's large from soil to leca. Plants are like people. It's so much harder to change your ways. When you're set to growing in soil, you don't want someone to come and take the soil out and put you in leca. So yeah, cross fingers, touch wood, things have been going well so far. It's been going through the long method since December. This plant. This is now February. So we've been doing the long method for over 2 months, I think, and the new roots are looking fantastic, and I'll soon be moving it into leca. And that video is going to be out maybe not so soon, because once I transition it into leca, I need to wait and see how that works out, because when I have that video ready for you, I want you to see the journey of this plant from day one right up until I say, yes, I transitioned this plant. It's going well. So it's been living in leca for 2 months. This is what it's looking like. I don't want any half messages. So anywho, sorry about that ramble. I'll go back to your question. 1 meter tall. So 1 meter is about what? Yay high? Would you use the long method? Look, to be on the safe side, I probably would use the long method, but I have transitioned fiddle leaf figs from soil to leca straight from soil straight into leca, and they have not skipped a beat. But I guess it depends on your conditions as well. When I did this, it was summer here in Melbourne. Temperatures were great. Everything was going really well. So depending on your conditions. But if it was me, I would be using the long method. I would have an air stone in there. I would be changing over my nutrient solution every week or every 2 weeks, honestly, just to make sure I give that plant a fighting chance. And of course, if you don't have fantastic light, I would have a grow light on that thing as well, because like I said, those transitions from soil to leca, that plant is very vulnerable. You just want to give it everything that you can. If you don't have any grow lights, there's some that I recommend in the description below. Check them out. If you're finding value from this video, please give it a like, subscribe to my channel, and share with your friends. Next question. Do Thai constellations prefer leca or pond when transitioned to semi-hydro from soil? Do they prefer? I don't know. I don't know. This is my Thai constellation back here. It's living in leca. I've got another little Thai constellation here that's living in leca as well. You can see my reservoir is dry. It has been so hot here. I've literally been watering plants like every day. It's annoying. Look at that. those roots are fantastic. That plant is really, really happy, albeit dry. My Thai constellations live in leca and they're happy. I've actually not tried them in pond. I see no reason why they would not grow in pond. They grow really well in pond. Lots of people grow them in pond. So I think it ultimately just depends on what medium you prefer, whether you prefer using leca or pond. I guess another thing to consider is a lot of people actually talk about Thai constellations getting a lot of root rot. I read a lot about this. Lots of people saying my Thai got root rot all the time. And they say they like to give them a little bit of a dry period when they're living in their leca. So yeah, I guess this is what you would be calling a little bit of a dry period. Not intentional, by the way. I don't intentionally give my plants dry periods. So it just depends on what you prefer to use, what's readily available for you. I know that pond is a lot more expensive than leca is. So whether that's something that you'd be considering as well, I don't know. But I'm hoping that my answer has shown you that yes, it is possible to grow your plants, your Thai constellations in leca, and they love it. So whether they prefer a leca or pond, who knows? I'm new to trying leca. I transferred my Monstera Thai to leca about a week ago. Previously, it was in pond, but it was droopy and nothing worked. Now that it's in leca, the roots are beginning to rot. Exactly what I was talking about earlier. The water is not directly on the roots, but they have quickly rotted. Help. Ooh, this is not good. I'm really sorry to hear that. I'm sure you must be distressed. Plus also, this video has actually taken quite a while to come. I hope that you've been able to sort your issue out. Again, I can't really speak to what's happening to your particular plant because I don't know what conditions the plant is living under, what was happening to the plant when it was in pond. I'm not sure exactly how you were keeping that. Maybe it was exposed to too much moisture when it was in that pond, because pond actually retains a lot more moisture than leca does. So it's, I guess in that way, it's actually easier for plants to kind of get root rot if they're more prone to it than they would in leca, because the particles in pond are so much smaller. And when you've got smaller particles, they're all bunched together, they retain moisture more than leca. So you can see this leca, there's, lots of big balls there. There's lots of space in there. So there's lots of air going through. And I like to have the additional ventilation in my holes as well. So in my pots as well, sorry. So I think all that actually helps with preventing root rot in plants like this one. So, well, of course, the first thing that I would recommend you do is take your plant out of that leca, out of that pond. I would whack it in a hydrogen peroxide solution just to try and sterilize that plant, get things going. And once it's been in that hydrogen peroxide solution for maybe an hour or two, or at least until the bubbles stop coming up, I would then put my plant, get rid of all the dead roots, right? Just clip them off, and then I would basically be re-rooting my plant if it was my plant. So I'd basically be doing the long method in this case. So I'd have my solution of Clonix clone solution and some root zone as well, just to get those roots going. Let that sit there until those roots are at least 2 or 3 inches long with some secondary roots. And then if it was my plant, I'm definitely putting it in leca and not putting it in pond for the reasons that I've discussed earlier. So I hope you've been able to sort your plant out and that it is not in plant heaven. All the best. Next question is suggestions on how to transfer a fiddle leaf fig to leca. Would it be better to do it from cuttings or to do the whole plants? Talked about fiddle leaf fig before. Fiddle leaf fig is just, it's a very hot topic in the leca world, I find. I think a lot of people want to transition their fiddle leaf figs from soil to leca, but are just absolutely petrified to do it, which is why I'm doing my video about my massive fiddle leaf fig plant. But as I said before, it is very possible. It is very easy to transition a small plant, a small fiddle leaf fig from soil to leca directly. So just clean those roots off and put them in leca and your plant will be fine, especially as long as you're providing the right conditions. So light, temperature, the rest. You know the drill. And I've got a video, I'll link it up above, that's where I talk about fiddle leaf figs growing in leca. That might be a good one to watch. But you can also start your fiddle leaf fig from cuttings. So you might make some cuttings from your fiddle leaf fig for various reasons. I've actually got some cuttings that I'm propagating at the moment. I want to bush up my fiddle leaf fig, so I want to actually put two plants in the one pot. So I chop my plants up. They're propagating at the moment and I will be potting them up. So that's a very good way, almost a foolproof way of getting your plants to grow in leca by actually establishing those roots that are used to growing in a hydro setup by water propagating and then putting them in leca. So I think that should be a fairly straightforward way of doing it. Another fiddle leaf fig question. Is it better to transfer a fiddle leaf fig when it's small? I recently transferred a 20 centimeter plant into leca and it's still limp. Will it pick up? So yes, as I said earlier, transitioning any plant from soil to leca when it's smaller, and by smaller, I don't mean teeny weeny baby plants. Teeny weeny baby plants have got their own issues, and that's not what we're talking about right now. But a fairly, decent sized plant is a lot easier, and plants do transition a lot easier. So with your plant that is still limp, I would love to know what conditions your plant is growing in. Humidity is something that a lot of people actually underestimate. One of the things that you can do to support your plant during that initial transition is to give it higher humidity. And it can be something as simple as grabbing your plant. So you've just transitioned your plant from soil to leca, right? It's living in that leca pot. Just put it in a bag, like a plastic bag, to raise that ambient humidity in there. That'll support the roots, support the leaves, and that plant will do a lot better than if you just leave it out there, right? You can also use a humidity dome. That's really, really great way of just raising the humidity around one plant. That works really, really well. I'm not sure whether this was the issue with your plant, but raising the humidity is definitely a game changer when you're doing things like this. Another thing, and this is a bit more involved, so to speak, is you could actually use an air stone. Using an air stone is one way of doing that. So you could have your plant that you've transitioned living in a larger cache pot, and you have an air stone in that cache pot, and that is just going to be oxygenating that nutrient solution. And that actually works really well to getting those roots established a lot quicker and in better health than plants that don't. I've done that with a few of my plants and it's worked really, really well. So if you're wanting to, just throw everything at your plant, including the kitchen sink, using an air stone is certainly one way to go. Next question. I'm wondering, when you soak your leca in your special sauce, how long are the nutrients good for? My leca can sit soaking for a few months till next time I need it. Are the nutrients still okay once made up and sat? At what point do I need to discard and move the leca to fresh special sauce mixture? Another question I get a lot of, and look, I'll be very honest with you. The answer to this question is I simply don't know. And the reason I don't know is I haven't done any tests to be able to say to you, look, have your leca sitting in that special sauce for 3 months, because after 3 months, the efficacy of that special sauce is gone. I have no idea. There are a few things to think about that I think about when I think about soaking my leca in a nutrient solution or in water and just leaving it there. This water or this nutrient solution is stagnant, right? And stagnant water, stagnant nutrient solution attracts microorganisms. Microorganisms start to grow and flourish. And the thing about microorganisms is that we can't see them. So you'll have your bacteria growing in there, all sorts of stuff growing in there. I don't know what is growing in there. I don't know if these things are going to be harmful to my plants or not. So when I've got my leca in my special sauce, the thing with me is because I'm using leca all the time. I use leca all the time. So I never have my leca sitting in there for months on end. I probably wouldn't have my leca sitting in there for months on end. What I probably would do if I was wanting to have my leca sitting there for months on end is I'd probably have it sitting in water, maybe. Then there isn't any nutrients in there that the bacteria might be, thriving off. I don't know. This is just, again, stuff that when I think about, these are things that I'm concerned about. Whether they're true or not, in all honesty, I don't know, because no one has really, not that I know of, has really looked at this kind of stuff. And if you know that someone has, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear about it because I get this question all the time and I'm constantly telling people I don't know because I really just don't know. But also when I've had my leca sitting in that water for maybe a few weeks, even if it's just water, I know that bacteria is growing in there. So I will actually go and reboil that water, just that leca, just to sterilize it. So my leca's been sitting in this water, right, for months. I'll throw out that water. I'll wash my leca, right? And then I will put it in my pot, my leca pot, and I will boil that leca again. So for another 30 minutes. And what I'm hoping I'm doing at this point is actually sterilizing that leca again. And if I know that I want to use this leca within the next maybe say 3, 4, 5 days or 1 week even, I will then put that leca in my special sauce and have it sit in my special sauce. Of course, this is not a necessary step, especially if it's leca that I've used before. So yeah, these are the things I think about when I think about keeping leca for a long time in a bucket and just having it sit there for months on end. I'm concerned. I'm concerned about the sterility of this leca. And of course, it's never going to be absolutely sterile, but yeah, I don't know what's been growing in there. So I want to boil it. How long that nutrient solution is good for? Basic answer is, I don't know. I wouldn't leave it for too long. I just think that things start to degrade after a while, especially if they're in light and stuff like that. I'm just thinking, oh yeah, nah. Get fresh nutrient. That's what I would do. Next question. If you're changing your plants from soil to leca, can you do it slowly by adding leca to the soil? Is that helpful or should it be done all at once? Also, do you get less pests with leca? Okay, that was 2 questions. Cheeky 2 questions. So I'll talk about pests. Do you get less pests with leca? Maybe. It depends on your setup and I'll explain. So if you've got certain plants in leca and then you've got some plants in soil, so you still have soil in your home. So depending on how you're taking care of your plants in soil, you might still have fungus gnats because those fungus gnats just love them some damp soil, right? Because that's where they grow, they lay their eggs, they're happy with that kind of thing. They're not happy in a leca environment, so you're less likely, almost never likely to have fungus gnats growing in your plants with leca. This is fungus gnats. I'm not talking about anything else. Even if you're growing your plants in leca, you can still get thrips. You can still get mealybugs. You can still get flat mites. You can still get all those things. The thing that makes leca really great when you're dealing with pests is that you can just get the whole plant and just dunk it in whatever it is you're using to treat the plant, and you're not having to do all those weird things that people who are growing plants in soil are. You put the plant in a bag and you're dunking it and you're hoping that soil doesn't fall out, all that kind of stuff. You don't have to worry about that. But do you get pests? Yes, you do. Less, maybe. Depends on your practice. Now, let's get to the issue of transitioning plants from soil to leca by adding the leca slowly. No. That just cannot work. I don't think so. This is actually the first time I've heard this, actually. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But no, I mean, if you're transitioning your plant from soil to leca, you just got to do it. You just got to get rid of that organic matter, the organic matter in the soil or the potting mix. Get rid of that. Clean off your roots because we're trying to get those roots as clean as we can. And then we're going to start feeding our plants using that reservoir. So if you've got soil and you just put the leca at the top and then you have a reservoir, that soil is going to be too damp, it's going to be too wet, and your plant is probably going to get root rot. That is not what we want to do. Now, on the flip side, if you want to start growing your plant in pon, it is possible to just grab it. I mean, that's what they recommend, I think. That's what the Lechuza people recommend. Just grab your plant in soil, whack it in your pot, put your pon there, and voila, you're good to go. That's pon. That's not leca. So, yeah. But with leca, that's not how it works. You just got to do the thing. Just bite the bullet, take the soil off, put the leca in, and away you go. You can put leca in with your soil, though, when you're growing your plants in soil and potting mix, and that's just as an amendment to your soil. You will not at that point say that your plant is growing in leca because it really isn't. You've just added leca clay balls to your soil, whether you're increasing aeration or whatever it is you're doing, that's what you're doing. Next question. I'm planning on transitioning all my plants to LECA, and with some of my plants that are bigger or sensitive, I'm using your long method. But is this best for all my plants or some? Especially plants like ZZ plants that don't like to be wet. Also, with plants that have established water roots, can they rot in the LECA if they're above the reservoir level from getting too dry? Hang on, I'm not understanding this last bit, but I'll try and figure it out. Using the long methods for plants like ZZ plants, certainly not. This is a ZZ plant that I got here. I recently transitioned this plant from soil to LECA. If you haven't seen the video, just click on the link above. It'll take you to it. And in that transition, nowhere do I mention the long method because ZZ plants do not like an excess of water. So you are not putting your ZZ plant in there. Things are going to go very badly and that plant will get root rot and that's going to be the end of it. So certain plants, things like Codex plants, for example, succulents, you will not be doing that when you're transitioning your plants from soil to LECA. Other plants will probably be happy. So you just kind of have to find out, is a plant water loving or isn't it water loving? If a plant is not water loving, you're probably not going to use the long method. I think that's kind of a blanket rule that I would say for that. Otherwise, majority of plants are quite happy to go through the long method. Now, if your plants have water roots, and when we say water roots, there's actually, I'll just clarify something here. There's no such thing as soil roots or water roots. Roots are roots. Or you've got a plant that are living in soil and plants that are used to living in a hydro environment or in a water environment. So when you're transitioning your plant from soil to LECA, what you're getting to do is get those roots that have been living in soil to get used to living in that hydro environment. And that's what that transition is about. And as that plant is transitioning from soil to LECA, the roots are actually growing. And those roots that have grown from the roots that have been used to living in LECA are used to now living in hydro environment or in water. And that's what people like to call water roots. Now, depending on the plant that you've got, some of these roots might actually not like to still be exposed to that hydro environment constantly. So I'm thinking especially plants like alocasias. I have found that my alocasias generally don't like to be exposed to the reservoir a lot. Most other plants like Hoyas, even ZZ plants, will be happy to actually have their roots growing in the reservoir and sitting in the reservoir. So just evaluate your plant, see how it's going, take it out of your plant out of the reservoir periodically, check on those roots. And sometimes you'll find that some of those roots are actually starting to desiccate, they're actually starting to decay. Go and flush your plants, clip those roots off, cut them off, and your plant will probably be okay. Alrighty, I'll stop here for today. Check out some of my other Q&A videos for more answers and more sessions. And I still have more questions for my last call out, and I'll answer those in my next video. So if you haven't had your question answered today, keep an eye out for the next video coming out soon.